A predator's eyes can hide behind a pretty smile until the day they can't. I used to think danger always showed itself through trembling hands, wild tempers, or raised voices. But I learned the hard way that the most damaging people walk in calmly, almost gracefully, wearing charm like it's a second skin. I remember the moment everything in my chest tightened, the exact second I realized my son wasn't just in trouble, he was gripped by someone who knew exactly how to trap gentle souls. Someone who counted on parents like me noticing too late. Let me ask you something, parent to parent, or older soul to younger one. Have you ever watched someone you care about drift toward a person who looked perfect on the outside but felt wrong in ways you couldn't quite explain? Maybe you tried to speak up. Maybe your voice shook when you warned them. Maybe they brushed you off, thinking you were just old-fashioned or overprotective. That was me standing on my own ranch, watching my boy Silas smile like he'd found the woman of his dreams, while every bone in my body whispered that something wasn't right. Silas was always kind-hearted, the kind of young man who'd ride out in a blizzard just to help a neighbor pull a calf from the mud. He didn't see danger coming because he wasn't the type to imagine people could hurt him on purpose. But the woman he let into his world wasn't there for love. She didn't want his heart, she wanted hold over his future. By the time I realized what she had on him, he was already tied up emotionally, mentally, and almost legally. I could see it in his eyes, the quiet panic, the strain, the exhaustion of carrying something he didn't know how to escape. There's a part of this story most folks won't expect, something tucked away where no one would think to look. A clue left behind by a frightened young man who didn't know who else to turn to. I found it under old wooden boards we hadn't touched in decades. Dust, cold air, and a secret that nearly tore everything apart. When I pulled those boards up and saw what my son had hidden, my knees almost gave out. Everything started making sense. Her confidence, her threats, his fear. What he buried down there changed the entire wedding day and nearly changed our family forever. Before we dig into this, tell me in the comments, have you ever ignored your gut and regretted it? And listen, if you're watching this and you still haven't subscribed yet, just pray you never end up wishing you had heard warnings like this sooner. Some folks learn too late. Don't be one of them. Before everything fell apart, life on the Thorn Ranch had a rhythm you could feel in your bones. Sunrise meant coffee strong enough to wake a dead mule, and chores that kept a man honest. Evenings were quieter, crickets humming, wind moving through the pasture, and my boy sitting beside me on the porch rail like he belonged nowhere else on earth. Silas always had a softness to him, the kind that makes a father proud but worried at the same time. Not weakness, just a big heart that didn't know how to close a door on anyone. That ranch shaped him into a hard-working man, but it didn't teach him how to spot someone who'd use kindness like a tool. Some nights, after a long day fixing fence lines or checking calves, Silas would wander into the kitchen with dust on his boots and a smile that stretched easy. He'd drop into the chair across from me, talking about the future, how he wanted a family, how he hoped the ranch would stay in our line for generations. I can still hear the way he laughed when the barn cat tried to steal our dinner rolls. He wasn't just my son, he was my right hand. A young man who carried the weight of the ranch with pride, never once complaining, never once asking for an easier life. If you knew him, you'd understand why someone with the wrong intentions would see opportunity written all over him. Silas wasn't the type to judge anyone. You could walk onto our land with ripped jeans, a broken truck, or a past you weren't proud of. He'd offer help before asking questions. That's what made him special and vulnerable. He trusted too easily. believing every person deserved the benefit of the doubt. Neighbors used to tell me, "Elias, that boy of yours would give away his own jacket in a blizzard." And they were right. But people like that often attract the kind who take advantage. When you've lived long enough, you learn that kindness draws two groups: those who appreciate it and those who hunt for it. I just never imagined the latter would walk straight into our world with a smile that fooled nearly everyone. If I'd known what was headed toward us, I would have grabbed my son by the shoulders and made him listen. Because life before she arrived was peaceful, steady, something worth protecting with both hands. But change doesn't always stomp through the door, it slips in quietly, acting harmless. Looking back, there were small things I should have paid more attention to. Silas staring off toward the road like he was expecting something. The way the ranch dogs barked on nights they usually slept soundly. The sudden stillness that came over him when talk of settling down came up. At the time, I brushed it off as nerves. Now I know better. What was coming would shake every corner of that ranch and nearly cost me my son. I still remember the first time I saw her, Lexi Ryder, stepping off that dusty Greyhound bus like she was stepping onto a stage. Not dressed flashy, not dressed cheap, just polished enough to turn heads without trying too hard. Most folks who come through our part of Montana carry the look of people who've worked hard for a long time. Lexi didn't. She carried confidence that didn't match small-town living, the kind that makes you pause and wonder where she came from and why she chose a place so far from everything she seemed built for. Silas noticed her immediately. I watched his eyes lock onto her from across the street, an expression I knew too well. Curiosity, hope, a spark I wasn't ready for. If I had known what she'd bring into our lives, I would have turned him around right then. She accidentally dropped her suitcase right in front of him. Silas rushed to help, of course, because that's who he was. The moment their hands touched the handle at the same time, she let out a soft laugh that seemed rehearsed. Not fake, just too smooth, like someone who'd practiced getting strangers comfortable around her. "Thank you," she said, flashing a smile that hit Silas harder than a kick from a wild horse. They talked for maybe 3 minutes, but I could already see the hook set. She complimented his manners, asked about the town, acted amazed by the wide-open land, as if she'd never seen sky stretch that far. What bothered me wasn't her charm. It was how quickly she adapted, like someone slipping into a role they'd played many times before. That afternoon, while Silas carried her bags to the cafe, I stayed outside and watched her from a distance. She scanned the buildings like she was studying them, not admiring them. She asked Silas question after question about ranch work, land ownership, cattle prices, and local families, as if she needed to know exactly who held what. And there was something else, a faint, expensive scent clinging to her clothes, not something a bus rider usually wears. Her hands were soft, too soft for someone who claimed she'd worked in lots of rough places. But Silas didn't notice any of that. He only saw a beautiful young woman who looked at him like he mattered. And when a lonely heart feels seen, it can miss the red flags waving right in front of it. Let me ask you something and be honest with yourself. Have you ever met someone who felt a little too perfect? Someone who stepped into your world so smoothly that you later wondered how you didn't catch the warning signs sooner? That's what Lexi was. Smooth edges, warm words, and not a crack showing. Silas didn't just fall for her, he dove head first, without checking the depth. And me? I stood there, feeling something I couldn't quite name yet, a tension I tried to ignore because I didn't want to smother my son's happiness. But looking back, I should have stepped in harder, earlier. You tell me, does this sound like someone genuine or someone calculating? Drop your guess in the comments. It didn't take long for Lexi to plant herself into our daily life. What started as just a place to stay until her car gets fixed turned into keys to the guest cottage in under a week. Silas insisted it was temporary. "Dad, she's got nowhere else to go," he said, his voice carrying that soft-hearted guilt he'd had since childhood. I didn't argue, not yet, but something about her ease bothered me. Most outsiders feel awkward on a ranch. They stand too stiff, step too carefully, ask too many questions. Lexi didn't. She walked the property like she'd lived there her whole life. She learned names fast, remembered little details, and complimented everyone just enough to win them over. To the untrained eye, she looked grateful. But to me, her comfort came a little too quickly. Silas had always been the type to fix problems that weren't his. A stray dog, a neighbor's broken fence, a stranger with a sad story, he'd run toward them every time. Lexi played into that weakness with expert precision. She talked about a rough childhood, broken friendships, bad luck in every city she'd lived in. She painted herself as someone who'd never been truly loved, never been chosen. And my boy, my good-hearted boy, felt called to be her rescue. I could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he straightened up when she walked into a room. She didn't just win his affection. She shaped it, turned it, pulled it toward her like she had a claim on it. I tried dropping hints. Nothing sharp, just a father's caution. "Son," I said once while we fixed a fence line, "some folks come to a place not because they love it, but because they need something from it." Silas didn't get angry, but he closed up. His shoulders slumped, his jaw tightened. "Dad, she's trying," he said quietly. "Give her a chance." A chance. I'd given chances to plenty of people in my life. Some earned them, some abused them. Lexi didn't feel like someone who needed grace. She felt like someone collecting leverage. But Silas only heard criticism, not concern. So I watched. I watched from the porch in the evenings as she walked around the yard, phone pressed to her ear, talking too quietly for anyone to hear. I watched the way she moved through our world, touching things, studying them, memorizing their place. Sometimes she'd look toward the house, thinking no one saw her. But I did. And every time our eyes met, she'd flash that polite smile, the kind that tells you nothing and hides everything. Within weeks of moving in, Lexi's questions shifted. It started casual: "How many acres does the ranch cover?" Or, "Are these barns insured?" Then it grew more pointed. She asked about titles, the paperwork for the cattle, even about land rights. Is the property held in a trust or under the ranch LLC? She asked casually over breakfast, as if she were curious for herself. I spat my tobacco into the jar and said, "It's held by the work of men who bled and sweated on it, girl." Silas gave me that look, the one that said, "Dad, don't be a grump." But I wasn't being grumpy. I was noticing the way her eyes lingered over the deeds, like she was mapping a takeover in her head. She asked questions other people wouldn't think to ask, and I didn't like the answers she was angling for. I could see it in my son, too. His brow furrowed whenever she asked, his hand tightening around his coffee cup. The ranch had been our life, our history, our inheritance, and he was too trusting to notice the storm approaching. Silas had never been cruel, never manipulative, always believed people were good until proven otherwise. That heart of his, it was a gift, but it left him exposed. And she knew it. Every time she leaned in close, her questions soft but pointed, I felt a knot in my chest. She wasn't asking for knowledge about the land. She was testing boundaries, measuring weakness, looking for a crack to wedge herself in. I had to keep calm, keep watch, and wait for the moment she'd reveal her hand. I spent afternoons sitting on the porch, watching her wander the property. She'd peek into barns, inspect gates, and take mental notes of everything she could touch. She smiled at the ranch hands. She joked with Silas, but sometimes her glance flicked toward the house or my office, the spot where the safe sat hidden. Her presence began to feel like a shadow that grew longer with each day. Every small movement, every question she asked, became a puzzle piece I didn't yet want to touch. I'd clear my throat loudly, tap the railing with my knuckles, just to remind her someone was watching. And she'd turn with that unshakable calm smile, the one that didn't give a thing away. I wanted to reach out to my son, to warn him, but I had to hold my tongue, let the pieces fall, let her show me her true colors. The more she questioned, the more I realized she wasn't planning a wedding, she was planning control. Every casual inquiry about paperwork or land structure was a probe. Every innocent, "I'm just curious," was a test. And my boy didn't see it. I felt the weight of that realization in my chest. If only I had spoken louder, sooner, the truth would eventually reveal itself. The moment would come when her intentions were clear. And when it did, the day we thought would be the happiest for my son would become the most dangerous. All because she had planted herself inside our lives with a smile that said nothing and eyes that saw everything. It didn't happen all at once. It was quiet, slow, like water eroding stone. Lexi leaned close to Silas one evening, voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "Dad's getting old. You need to take control," she said. And just like that, a wedge drove itself into the space between us. My boy hesitated, looking at me differently, hesitated like he was hearing the words of someone he trusted more than his own father. I wanted to shake him, shout, make him see the manipulation in front of him. But I stayed silent, because I knew she wanted a fight. She wanted my son to believe she was the only one who cared, and she almost succeeded. I've spent decades watching Silas grow, teaching him the value of hard work, honesty, and loyalty. And now, here he was, pulled by invisible strings, unsure who to trust. A father's heart breaks in quiet ways when your child doubts your guidance, when your protection seems invisible, when someone else rewrites the lines of your family story. Every time I caught a flicker of fear or confusion in his eyes, it cut me deeper than any cattle branding iron ever could. He was trapped not by walls or locks, but by manipulation, by a woman who knew how to make him question everything he thought he knew. And I felt powerless. Almost. Let me stop for a moment and speak to you, watching this unfold. There are people out there who can quietly twist someone you love, pull them into danger without you noticing until it's almost too late. Stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're warnings. Subscribe so stories like this never blindside you the way they blindsided my boy. And remember, it only takes one person who knows your family's weaknesses to change everything. If you don't subscribe, ask yourself, would you know it was happening in time? Or would you sit back, too late, wishing someone had spoken up before it was too late? The night before the wedding, I stayed late in my study, going over the ranch books and checking the security logs. That's when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Lexi was standing by my safe, hands hovering as if testing the lock. She didn't hear me because of the thick rugs, but I was watching like a hawk. I cleared my throat, slow and deliberate. She turned, a practiced smile on her face. Just looking for a stapler for the seating charts, she said. Her tone was calm, casual, too calm. I didn't believe her. Something in the way she handled the safe, the way she knew exactly where everything sat, told me this wasn't the first time she'd been in a place she shouldn't have been. I studied her for a moment. The mask of innocence was slipping, just a little, but enough for me to see the predator under the charm. At that moment, my heart sank. She wasn't just ambitious. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was dangerous, calculating, and she had designs on my son, my property, everything I had built over 6 decades. I could feel the weight of the coming storm pressing against the walls of that study. Every instinct I'd honed over a lifetime screamed that my boy was in immediate danger, but I had to play it carefully. Silas still trusted her, still saw only the woman she wanted him to see. And I knew that if I tried to intervene too early, it could backfire, leaving him trapped deeper than before. I took a slow step forward, keeping my voice even. Lexi, you don't need to do that. Her smile didn't falter, but I could see the flash of impatience or fear behind her eyes. I didn't know yet what she'd done to my son. I didn't know how deep her control went, or what secrets she had already forced him to keep. But the note he would give me tomorrow would tell everything. I stayed in the shadows, watching her leave the study with the composure of someone who thought she'd gotten away with it. Outside, the Montana night was silent. The stars spread across the sky, indifferent to the battle about to unfold in my home. I felt a cold stone settle in my gut, the kind of dread that comes only when you know someone is playing a long game, and the stakes are everything you care about. And I realized then, the wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was the opening move in a fight for my son, my family, and the ranch itself. Tomorrow, I would see exactly how far she had gone, and it would change everything. The morning sun crawled over the mountains, painting the sky a deep, angry red. My father used to say a red sunrise was a shepherd's warning, a signal to pay attention, to be alert. I tightened my tie in the mirror, staring at my reflection. I'd buried many loved ones under Montana soil, and I knew the feeling in my gut that morning. It wasn't just nerves. It was a warning. Something was about to break, and I had to be ready. I stepped onto the porch and felt the cold wind slice across my face, carrying the scent of hay and the distant river. It should have been peaceful. It should have been a perfect day for my boy. Instead, every shadow seemed sharper. Every sound carried an edge I couldn't ignore. The ranch was alive, humming with the usual morning activity. Cows lowing, gates creaking, the faint smell of leather and feed. Yet in the middle of this ordinary rhythm, I felt a storm moving closer. I glanced at Silas, dressed in his suit, trying to stand tall. He looked like a man preparing for celebration, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands twitched ever so slightly. He trusted her. He believed in the day, in the marriage, in the woman he had chosen. And I knew deep in my bones that all of that belief was about to be tested. Out here, beauty and danger often arrive together. The mountains might look calm, the morning crisp and golden, but one wrong step could change everything. I checked the arrangements. The tent in the field, chairs lined with white linen, lilies that Lexi had insisted on. Too many details, too much control for a woman who claimed she had nowhere else to go. Silas would walk into this setting unaware, expecting a perfect day. But my mind kept returning to the study last night, to the safe, to the questions she'd asked about the land. I could feel the pieces of her plan clicking into place, even if my boy couldn't. Every ranch hand seemed oblivious to the tension in the air. Every flower, every ribbon, every note of music was part of a stage that I wasn't sure would end well. I stepped back into the house, heart heavy. One thing was certain. By the time the vows were spoken, the truth under the floorboards would surface, and nothing would remain the same. I found my boy in the dressing room, an hour before the ceremony. He was staring at himself in the mirror, tugging at his tie like it was choking him. His hands shook. His reflection looked tired, hollow, weighed down by something I couldn't name at first. "Son," I said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. His muscles jumped at my touch, but he didn't turn. I can't," he whispered. "I can't go through with it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. He was never a coward, never indecisive. But whatever Lexi had done, whatever hold she had over him, it was more powerful than any threat or argument I could make. I could feel the panic rising in his chest, the kind that builds quietly and then threatens to drown you. I had to stay calm, stay grounded, and let him make the choice he'd been forced into against his will. I leaned closer, lowering my voice to just above a whisper. "Son, the horses are saddled. We can ride 5 miles into the brush before anyone even notices. Leave everything behind. Forget her. Forget the wedding." He shook his head, almost violently. "I can't, Dad. She's got everything planned. It's too late." Too late. My gut clenched. Something had taken root in his life, in his heart. Something I couldn't see clearly yet. Blackmail, threat, manipulation. I didn't know which, only that the boy I raised was trapped. He refused to run, refused to escape, and yet the fear in his eyes said he knew what she could do if he didn't comply. I wanted to grab him and drag him out of that room, out of this nightmare, but I knew any sudden move could push him further into her control. I had to be patient. I had to let him tell me, or show me, the leverage she held. I paused and looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at the floor, a mixture of fear and shame painting his features. And I thought to myself, how many sons, how many children are trapped in situations like this, forced to obey someone else's will because they feel powerless. This is where you need to pay attention. My boy's life, our ranch, everything he'd worked for, could be taken in an instant. I could feel it, every heartbeat in that room, every trembling finger, screaming danger. You might think you'd notice someone manipulating your loved ones, but sometimes it's subtle, so subtle you don't realize the trap until it's closing around them. Tell me, what leverage do you think she had over him? Drop your answer in the comments. Think carefully, because if this were your family, would you catch it in time? Or would you look back, wishing you had known sooner? The ceremony started precisely at 4. Guests murmured as Lexi appeared at the top of the aisle, her dress flowing like it owned the wind. She held her head high, every step measured, every smile rehearsed. To the untrained eye, she looked radiant. To me, she looked like someone who had already won a battle no one else knew existed. Her eyes found mine for a moment, a flicker, a challenge, a warning. I didn't flinch. I'd been watching her long enough to know that a smile can hide more than it reveals. The lilies she had imported filled the air with a heavy sweetness, clashing with the crisp Montana breeze. I gritted my teeth, reminded of the contrast between beauty and deceit. I turned my attention to my son. He stood at the altar, bouquet of wildflowers in hand, the traditional thorn gesture of carrying them to the bride. His fingers trembled slightly, gripping the stems like they were a lifeline. His face betrayed everything he couldn't say aloud: the fear, the confusion, the knowledge that he was under her thumb. Silas glanced at Lexi, and I could see him struggling to force a smile. His knees were stiff, his chest tight. Every instinct in me screamed to intervene, to pull him away, to end this farce before it even began. But I held my ground. I had to wait. I had to let the moment come to reveal the truth. The preacher's voice began, carrying soft words of love and honor across the valley. I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to the tension, watching the interplay between my son and the woman who had manipulated him for months. Guests whispered, unaware of the storm quietly moving through our family. Every step she had taken to integrate herself into our lives, every question, every smile, every calculated move, it all led to this moment. And I knew that soon, the calm Montana morning would fracture. All it would take was one small action, one quiet gesture, one secret revealed. That's when the real story would start, when my boy's silent plea would finally break through the mask she wore so carefully. The preacher's voice echoed through the valley, calm and measured. Does anyone have any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage? Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Guests shifted in their chairs, unsure if they had misheard, if the pause was part of the ceremony. I sat in the front row, jaw tight, heart hammering. I wasn't thinking of etiquette or tradition. I was thinking of my son, standing at the altar, trapped by fear and manipulation. And then I saw it. His hands moved inside the bouquet, fingers fumbling for something hidden. A note, crumpled, yellowed, trembling with desperation. He didn't look at Lexi. He didn't look at the preacher. Only me. He stepped forward, boots clicking against the wooden platform she had insisted on, and pressed the note into my palm. Ice-cold fingers, a whisper that cut through the morning calm. "Read it now, Dad." I unfolded the paper carefully, under the shadow of my hat so no one could see. 4 words, jagged and trembling, written in my boy's hand. "Dad, help me." Blackmail. Beneath it, a crudely drawn map of the old cellar behind the guest cottage. An X marked the floorboards. My heart sank. The words spoke louder than any scream ever could. Lexi froze for a fraction of a second. Her mask faltered, just long enough for me to see the predator slip. Panic flickered in her eyes before she quickly replaced it with practiced composure. She thought she had control. She thought my son had no escape. But the note was proof. The silent plea was a spark in the dark. The entire field seemed to hold its breath. Guests unaware of the danger surrounding them, caught in the quiet before the storm. I glanced at my boy. His eyes were hollow but resolute. He trusted me. I glanced at Lexi. The mask had slipped just enough to tell me everything I needed to know. And I realized this wasn't about a wedding. It was about leverage, manipulation, and a battle for control that had been quietly unfolding for months. The bouquet in his hands wasn't just tradition. It was a lifeline, a way to signal danger without giving her the satisfaction of confrontation. I looked back at the guests, their eyes bright with expectation, and felt the weight of the moment. One wrong move, and everything we had worked for could be lost. I folded the note back into my hand, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. Tomorrow, the truth would come to light. But today, it was silent, a cry that only a father could hear. The weight of the note burned in my hand. I felt every eye in the field on me, waiting for the next line, the next motion, the next word. I stood, boots pressing firmly against the wooden platform, and the murmurs quieted immediately. There's something about a thorn standing with purpose they notice. The rings can wait, I said, voice carrying across the crowd. Calm, firm, impossible to ignore. The preacher froze. Lexi's smile faltered. Guests blinked, trying to process the sudden pause. This ceremony is on hold, I continued. We have some family business to settle first. Silas nodded slightly, relief flickering in his eyes. He had passed me the note, and now, together, we were about to act. I pointed toward two of my oldest ranch hands, Caleb and Wyatt. Nobody leaves this property, I commanded. If anyone tries to drive out, block the road. Lexi's composure broke almost instantly. Her city friends tensed, whispering and fuming. But out here, rules were made in the dirt and enforced with experience. She tried to step toward me, voice rising. Elias, sit down. You're ruining my wedding. I ignored her. My focus was my son, the note in my pocket, the X marked on that map, and the seller waiting for us. Silas stayed close, shoulders tense but steady. He finally understood this was the moment that could end her control once and for all. Before we move on, let me ask you something. What would you do in my shoes? Would you stop the ceremony? Even with hundreds of witnesses and the bride ready to say, I do? Comment yes or no. Think carefully, because in situations like this, hesitation can cost everything. And if you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself this. Would you recognize a hidden danger before it's too late? Stories like this aren't just tales, they're warnings. Subscribe now, so the next time someone you love is being quietly manipulated, you'll know to act before it's too late. I led Silas out of the altar area, keeping a steady grip on his arm. The wedding guests were frozen, confused, unsure if this was part of the plan or a sudden emergency. Lexi trailed behind, voice rising with every step. Elias, stop this! You don't know what you're doing! I didn't respond. Every word she shouted was noise, irrelevant against the truth I now held in my hand. We crossed the field, past the white tent and the rows of linen-covered chairs, toward the guest cottage. Each step tightened the knot in my chest. Something hidden waited in the cellar, and it was up to us to uncover it before it was too late. She tried to grab Silas, to pull him back into the wedding, but he stepped out of her reach. Her voice cracked, a mix of fury and fear. You're ruining everything. If we don't finish this, everything falls apart. I glanced down at my son. His jaw was set, eyes determined, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the panic he'd been holding inside for months. Lexi's threats were empty without action, and she knew it. The moment we reached the cellar door, I could see the mask she wore slipping, revealing just a glimpse of the desperation she'd been hiding all this time. The cellar door stood there, heavy and dark, tucked behind the lilac bushes. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes sweep the area. Silence, except for the faint creak of the wind in the branches. I could almost feel her secrets pressed under those floorboards. Silas gave me a nod, trusting me entirely to guide him. I glanced at Lexi one last time. Her expression told me everything. She had hidden something, and it was far more dangerous than either of us could have guessed. The question now, what exactly had she buried under those boards? And for you watching, ask yourself, how far would someone go to control a family, a son, a life? The answer waits just behind that door. The air changed the moment we stepped through the heavy wooden door. It was cooler here, with the faint smell of damp earth mixing with old cider barrels and the faint musk of rotting wood. I held the flashlight steady, letting the beam sweep across the room. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with rusted cans, tools, and jars that hadn't been touched in years. Dust floated in motes, catching the light like tiny fireflies trapped in the air. Silas followed close behind, silent, eyes wide. Every step we took creaked against the old wooden floor. I could feel the tension radiating off him. This was more than curiosity, it was fear, and rightly so. Whatever Lexi had hidden here, it wasn't small. I could sense it before even seeing the first clue. She had been playing a long game, and it all led to this dimly lit corner of the cellar. I unfolded the note again, letting my eyes trace the crude lines my son had drawn. The X was marked in the far corner, behind a stack of empty crates, and covered in a thin layer of dust. I moved the crates aside, careful not to alert Lexi with noise. She hovered at the stairs, biting her lip, pretending calm while her hands trembled just slightly. The floorboards in that corner looked newer than the rest. One of them, in particular, was slightly raised, the grain of the wood different. It matched the map perfectly. I handed Silas the crowbar, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. He hesitated, then handed it back. He trusted me to handle this. "Stay close," I whispered. "Whatever's under these boards, we'll handle it together." I took a deep breath and pressed the crowbar into the narrow gap, feeling the old wood shift and groan under pressure. The creaking intensified as the floorboards began to loosen. My eyes scanned the shadows, expecting her to leap in at any moment, but she stayed frozen, like a statue of fear. I could sense the truth pressing against the boards, hiding in the darkness, waiting to be revealed. My heart hammered, muscles tensed, every instinct screaming that this moment could decide everything. Silas's hand found mine, and I gave a quick squeeze, a silent promise that he wasn't alone. The X marked more than a location. It marked a turning point. Everything Lexi had plotted, every secret she'd whispered to control him, every lie she'd fed, was about to be exposed. I paused before the final heave, letting the tension stretch like a drawn bow. Outside, the valley remained calm, the Montana morning unchanged, but in this cellar, everything was about to shift. I braced myself. Whatever lay under these boards would explain the fear, the blackmail, and the months of manipulation that had trapped my son in silence. I jammed the crowbar into the gap and heaved. The wood groaned, protested, and finally splintered under the force. Dust exploded into the air, making us cough. Lexi lunged forward, hands clawing at my sleeve, her voice shrill. "Stop! That's private property. You can't." "Back!" I roared. My voice echoed like a warning across the cellar walls. She stumbled back, her expensive dress catching on the rough wood. Silas stayed close, watching with wide eyes, a mix of fear and relief painted across his face. He trusted me, and I couldn't let him down. As the boards came loose, a small, fireproof lockbox revealed itself, tucked against the wall. Next to it was a digital recorder and a stack of papers that made my stomach tighten. I knelt carefully, fingers brushing dust aside. The lockbox was heavy, worn from use, and the recorder looked small, but capable of carrying months of secrets. The papers caught my attention first: deeds, transfer documents, signatures, all forged. They claimed the Thorn Ranch had already been signed over to a corporation in the Cayman Islands. I picked up the recorder. It felt ominous in my hands, quiet, but I knew the weight it carried. The truth about my son, the blackmail, the control Lexi had wielded, everything would be on that device. Lexi's face paled. For the first time, the perfect mask slipped entirely, revealing panic, fear, and the recognition that her plan was crumbling before her eyes. "You think this changes nothing?" she spat. I have the papers. He can't stop me. I didn't answer. I set the lockbox aside and pressed play on the recorder. A voice filled the cellar, unmistakably Silas's, though slurred, broken, manipulated. He spoke of a night that never happened, a confession that was false, one Lexi had crafted to control him. Every word was a tool to bend him to her will, every syllable a trap she thought unbreakable. I clenched my jaw, feeling a mix of fury and sorrow. This was more than greed, it was cruelty, carefully applied over months. Silas stepped back, silent, letting me handle what had been hidden for too long. The X on the floorboards hadn't just marked a spot. It had marked the turning point of this entire story. Everything Lexi had built for herself, every lie, every threat, every manipulation, it would all come undone, and we were just getting started. I pressed play on the recorder, the soft hum of the device filling the cellar. At first, it was quiet, almost imperceptible, but then a voice emerged, my son's voice, yet not my Silas. It was hollow, coated in fear, confusion, and a heavy sadness that wasn't truly his own. Why did this happen? The voice stammered. It was my fault. I should have stopped it. I froze, listening carefully. Every word had been twisted, whispered to him in moments when he was vulnerable, drugged, and exhausted. Lexi had manipulated him, feeding lies, forcing him to confess to the death of his own mother, a crime he never committed. My hands clenched the recorder tighter, knuckles white. Rage and sorrow collided in my chest. She had weaponized his grief, turned his love for his family into a cage. Every whispered lie, every carefully timed suggestion had been a tool for control. Silas stood behind me, silent, eyes brimming with guilt that was not truly his own. He had carried this false burden for months, believing her words, believing he had no escape. I lowered my voice, speaking directly to my son. It wasn't you, Silas. None of it. You've been trapped, and that's on her, not you. The tears welled in his eyes. He couldn't speak, couldn't protest, only nod. Relief mixed with heartbreak. A man finally released from the weight of lies that had nearly broken him. Lexi watched from the stairs, her composure cracking. Panic had overtaken her practiced demeanor. She realized, finally, that the strings she had pulled were no longer invisible. I took a slow breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. This recording didn't just reveal her scheme, it exposed her cruelty, her manipulation, her blackmail. Every ounce of control she thought she had was slipping from her hands. The cellar was heavy with silence, filled only with the faint static from the recorder and the shallow breaths of my son. Outside, the wedding continued unaware, guests still thinking of this day as a celebration. I glanced at Silas. You've been carrying a lie. Now it's gone. Nothing she says can hold you anymore. The truth was now fully in my hands. Lexi's plan had been simple on the surface. Drug my son, plant a false confession, blackmail him into signing away the ranch. Simple for her, devastating for him. But the trap had a flaw she underestimated. The loyalty, the instinct, the protective fire of a father. I had been watching, waiting, and the moment had come to expose her. Silas's face softened, his shoulders easing. The boy I knew, the man I trusted, was finally free from the heavy chains she had placed on his mind. Lexi's face was ashen. Every step she had taken to secure her victory now seemed foolish, desperate, transparent. The papers, the recording, her threats, all of it had failed. I looked down at the recorder one last time, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. This was not just a victory. It was a lesson in vigilance, trust, and the lengths some will go to exploit the love of a good man. And for those watching, ask yourself, how far would someone go to control the ones you love? How quickly can a trusted person turn into a threat when greed and manipulation take hold? The answer was in my hands, the recording now silent, and the path forward clear. I stepped closer to Lexi, boots firm against the cellar floor, eyes locked on hers. Every inch of confidence she'd carried since arriving on my ranch was now cracking. "You're a special kind of evil," I said, low and steady, letting the words hang between us like a warning. Her smile faltered, the practiced mask she'd perfected over months finally slipping completely. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She realized in that moment that every lie, every threat, every manipulation she had used to control my son was now exposed. "You thought you could corner him, control him, take what belongs to us," I continued. "You miscalculated. Always remember, a thorn knows every corner of his land, every lock, every path, and we watch those who think they can take from us." She straightened, fury and fear mixing into a dangerous edge. "It doesn't matter. I already have the signed papers. One push of a button and everyone will believe he's guilty. You can't stop me." I didn't flinch. Her threats were empty without leverage, and her leverage was gone. "I'm not interested in threats," I said, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through her bravado. "Your tricks don't work here. You've manipulated my son, tried to steal his future, but that ends today. Every lie, every whisper, every false confession, it all fails now. The only power you have left is what you can admit to in front of me and anyone watching." I could see her calculating, panic clawing at her mind. Lexi thought technology would save her. Phones, recordings, emails, her kingdom of lies. But she hadn't accounted for one thing: the thorn way. "Think carefully," I said, stepping closer, keeping my hand on the lockbox. "You believe you can send that recording. You believe you control the narrative. But out here, we use what we can touch, what we can manage. And we never let anyone weaponize what they don't understand." Her eyes widened, uncertainty flickering. I could see it the moment she realized that her control over my son and the ranch was about to collapse completely. The stage was set for her next mistake, and I knew the next move would seal her fate. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, she had no escape. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote, the kind we used to control the ranch's heavy gates. Lexi's eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "You think your little tricks with phones and recordings give you control?" I asked, voice steady, cold. "Out here, we deal in things we can touch, see, and manage. That includes the signals you're counting on." With a flick of the switch, her phone went dead. No bars, no signal, nothing. 10 minutes ago, she could have sent that recording to ruin my son. Now, it was just a lifeless device in her hand. She stared at it in disbelief. Panic rose fast, uncontrolled. "No, no, this can't be happening. I can still—" "Not this time," I interrupted. "Every step you planned, every message you thought you could send, gone. Technology isn't your friend when you're outmatched." Her breath came fast. She turned toward the stairs, hoping to escape, hoping for service, hoping for leverage, but the truth was, staring her in the face, she had none. You can't stop me! I'll still—" Her voice cracked, threatening now out of pure panic. I shook my head. "You overplayed. You underestimated a father protecting his son. You counted on control you didn't have. That recording you wanted to send? Dead in the water. Her eyes darted frantically to the cellar door, realizing the gates were locked, the ranch hands positioned. Every attempt to regain power was collapsing. And for you watching, ask yourself, if someone you loved was being manipulated like this, would you act fast enough? Would you notice the warning signs before it was too late? If you're still not subscribed yet, why not? Stories like this don't just entertain, they warn. Every missed instinct, every ignored signal can cost someone you care about dearly. Drop a comment below if you think you'd recognize the danger in time. Or tell me why you haven't subscribed yet. Because the next time a threat like this comes quietly, you'll wish you had acted sooner. Don't wait. Don't let hesitation leave someone vulnerable. Stay alert, stay aware, and subscribe now, before the next story blindsides you like this one almost did. I picked up the stack of papers again, letting my eyes trace each signature and stamp, every line that Lexi had counted on to secure her control over the ranch told a single story fraud. The witness signature on the deeds wasn't just suspicious, it belonged to Beaufort Miller, my lawyer. And Beaufort had been dead for 3 years. Every forged signature, every attempted manipulation, was built on a lie that couldn't stand. Lexi's confidence wavered. Her mouth opened, as if to argue, but the words faltered before they even formed. I could see the realization settling in. Her plan, carefully crafted and executed over months, was meaningless. Her hands trembled as she clutched the papers, her eyes darting back and forth between the lockbox and the stack of useless documents. You can't," she hissed, a desperate edge to her voice. "I have him. I have the papers. You don't have anything," I said firmly. "The only thing you controlled was a lie. Every attempt to corner my son, every threat, every whispered word, it's all empty. The ranch isn't yours. He isn't yours to manipulate, and you're going to answer for every bit of it." She faltered, realizing that her carefully laid foundation was nothing more than paper and ink, worthless in the face of truth and loyalty. I set the papers down, leaning back slightly, letting the silence stretch. Outside the cellar, the wedding guests were still unaware, waiting for the ceremony to continue. Lexi's panic was tangible, the last threads of control slipping through her fingers. The next step was clear: someone needed to ensure the law witnessed the truth. And as if on cue, I could hear the faint crunch of boots on the gravel outside. Every move she had planned to manipulate my son and the property was now exposed, undone, powerless. For anyone watching, remember, even the cleverest deception can fail when vigilance, loyalty, and instinct take control. And sometimes, justice doesn't wait for permission. It arrives at the right moment, every single time. While Lexi believed she was in control, I had prepared months in advance. Microphones hidden throughout the guest cottage, disguised as harmless devices, had recorded everything she ever said within my walls. Every plan, every whisper, every attempt to manipulate my son had been captured. I picked up a small receiver from the cellar table, letting the faint, static hum in my hand. The moment we entered, the recordings had already been transmitting directly to me. I pressed play, and her voice filled the room, crystal clear, repeating her threats and confessions with nothing left hidden. Lexi froze, eyes wide, realizing that her supposed private words were no longer private. The mask she had worn for months, the one she thought could never slip, was gone, shattered by the very instruments she had ignored. "You see, Lexi," I said, voice calm but commanding, "the truth doesn't hide in whispers. It doesn't matter how quiet you think you are. The cellar door creaked open, and Sheriff Grady stepped inside, handcuffs in one hand, a steely expression on his face. I had called him earlier, explaining what we'd uncovered, and letting him arrive at just the right moment. Lexi's eyes darted from me to Grady, panic surging. You can't arrest me. This isn't legal, she cried. Grady's gaze was unwavering. I've heard enough, he said. We're done here. Every word Lexi had spoken in her recorded confession now became evidence. Every attempt to control my son, to manipulate, to commit fraud, had been caught on tape. She realized too late that she had been trapped by her own overconfidence. The clever tricks she thought would work against a single family had no chance against months of preparation, careful observation, and the loyalty of those she underestimated. Lexi's hands trembled as Grady placed the cuffs on her wrists. Her luxurious dress, once a symbol of triumph, now dragged in the dirt, stained and torn. She couldn't escape, couldn't manipulate, couldn't lie her way out. The weight of her failed plan pressed down on her, and she slumped against the stairs, finally understanding that every ounce of deceit she had used had been captured. I stood beside Silas, watching her realization unfold, knowing that my son was finally free. Free from blackmail, free from fear, free from the toxic control Lexi had wielded over him. And for anyone watching, take this to heart. Sometimes, the smallest precautions, the quietest preparations, and the instinct to protect what's yours are the difference between victory and ruin. Silas and I stepped out of the cellar, the midday sun burning across the Thorn Ranch. The wedding guests were still frozen in confusion, unsure what had just unfolded behind the lilac bushes. Whispers moved through the crowd like wind over dry hay. I placed a hand on Silas's shoulder, feeling the weight of his relief and exhaustion. We're not done yet, I said, my voice carrying clearly to anyone listening. It's time to set things right in front of everyone who needs to know the truth. Lexi had been removed from the equation, but the story wasn't over. The people standing in the field had seen only fragments they needed to witness the full measure of justice and understand why my son was finally free. I adjusted my hat, feeling the leather against my brow, and took a deep breath. Every eye was on me now, every pair of ears attuned to what a Thorn man had to say. Silas stood beside me, calm now, hands steady. He knew the truth, and he knew his father would make sure it was heard. I scanned the guests, noting the blend of city sophistication and rural familiarity. The mix of curiosity, judgment, and concern was palpable, but I didn't hesitate. This was the moment to reveal the story, to close the chapter on fear and deception. I cleared my throat, the sound carrying across the field. Folks, I began, letting my voice ring out strong and clear. You're about to see why the Thorn Ranch is more than land. It's family, loyalty, and justice. Lexi's absence was obvious now, but the tension she had created still lingered like smoke after a fire. Everyone was waiting for the explanation, for the reason why the ceremony had been interrupted. I glanced at Silas. He gave a small nod, the silent acknowledgement of trust and relief. It was time to let the truth be known. And for those watching, consider this. There are moments in life where a single decision, a single act of protection, can change everything for those you love. I stepped up to the microphone, the wooden platform of the altar creaking slightly under my weight. Guests shifted nervously, unsure if they should sit, leave, or speak. I cleared my throat and let my voice carry across the field. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, slow and deliberate. The wedding you were expecting today will not take place. The bride, it turns out, had another engagement, one with the law. A ripple went through the crowd. Murmurs, whispers, a few shocked gasps. I let it settle before continuing. Everything you saw, every beautiful dress, every fancy arrangement was part of a plan to manipulate and deceive. But my son is free, and justice will be served. Silas stood beside me, shoulders squared, a quiet strength returning to him. The relief on his face was enough to make the confusion out there fade into clarity. Caleb, Wyatt, and the rest of the ranch hands let out a collective cheer. The tension that had hung over the property for months, maybe years, finally lifted. Lexi's schemes were exposed, and my son stood free from the chains she had tried to bind him with. The air felt lighter, filled with the scent of hay, earth, and freedom. I looked out over the field and saw guests processing the revelation, their curiosity turning into admiration for the strength of family and the power of vigilance. Silas caught my eye and gave a small, grateful nod. I patted him on the shoulder, letting him know the weight he had carried was gone. And for those of you watching, consider this. Would you have stopped the ceremony if it were your family? Would you have acted before it was too late? Comment justice if you think she got what she deserved. Let others know where you stand. This story isn't just about a wedding. It's about protecting the people you love, trusting your instincts, and understanding that manipulation can appear in the most unexpected forms. Every choice, every moment of courage makes the difference. And today, my son and I acted before it was too late, something I hope you'll remember the next time a warning appears where you least expect it. Sheriff Grady led Lexi toward the waiting cruiser. Her once confident stride had crumbled into uneven steps, the cuffs cold and heavy against her wrists. The expensive white dress, torn and dirt-streaked, clung to her like a ghost of the persona she had tried to maintain. She cast one last look toward my son, as if hoping to find a trace of fear or submission there, but all she saw was strength, freedom earned and reclaimed. "You underestimated us," I said quietly, my voice carrying just enough for her to hear. "No one threatens my family and walks away." The sheriff's grip was firm, guiding her to the car. The city friends she had brought along looked stunned, whispers rippling as they processed the reality. The threat was gone, and justice had been delivered. By the time Lexi reached the cruiser, the realization of her failure hit fully. She sank against the door, head in her hands, sobs spilling out raw, unfiltered, and powerless. She had tried to control, manipulate, and frighten. She had schemed to steal the land and the life of my son, and now, the very system she had hoped to exploit was taking her away. For the first time, she was utterly human in her fear and regret, a stark contrast to the poised, polished predator we had met months ago. I stood with Silas, watching the cruiser roll down the gravel road, Lexi's cries fading into the distance. The ranch was quiet, the tension lifted, and yet the weight of what had almost happened lingered. This was more than a victory. It was a lesson. Some threats hide in charm, in smiles, in whispered lies, but when you stand with truth, loyalty, and vigilance, they fail. Silas exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing, eyes meeting mine. We didn't need words. Out here, justice isn't abstract. It's the peace that comes when the people you love are safe. After Lexi was taken away, and the last echoes of confusion faded across the ranch, Silas and I walked back to the porch. The late afternoon sun cast long streaks of gold over the fields, highlighting the mountains beyond. For the first time in months, the air felt calm, heavy with relief instead of tension. Silas sank into the old rocking chair beside me, shoulders slumped, hands trembling slightly as he released the last of his fear. I sat down next to him, feeling the familiar creak of the wood under our weight. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly, voice unsteady but sincere. "I didn't think I could get out. I thought I'd ruined everything." I patted his hand with my rough, calloused palm. "Son, a thorn man might get caught in a trap now and then, but as long as I'm breathing, no one takes what belongs to us. Not our land, not our family, not you." He exhaled, a long, shaky release, the tension rolling out of him like steam from a kettle. For once, I could see him as he truly was, strong, loyal, but blinded by someone who didn't deserve his trust. I leaned back, letting my eyes roam the ranch we'd fought so hard to protect. Each fence post, each barn beam, each pasture held years of sweat, blood, and love. And today, it all felt secure again. "You know, Silas," I said, my voice low, thoughtful, "sometimes people who seem harmless carry danger. Smiles can mask greed, lies, and cruelty. You have to trust what your gut tells you, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels like you're overreacting." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what could have happened. "I should have listened sooner," he admitted. "I didn't see it. I thought I could handle it." "You did what you could," I said gently. "And sometimes, the people you love need someone to act before they even realize the danger. That's what fathers do. That's what families do. We protect each other, even when it hurts." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves, carrying the scent of hay and pine. The ranch, our home, had survived yet another test. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle sitting on the railing, handing one to Silas. We clinked them softly, a quiet toast to survival, justice, and family. "I'll never forget this day, Dad," he said, gaze steady now. No trace of the fear from earlier. "You saved me. You saved us." "I didn't save anyone, but reminded a thorn how to stand," I replied with a small, wry smile. "And remember, the next time someone shows their true colors, you'll see it faster. You'll act faster. You'll protect faster." We sat in silence for a while, rocking gently, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch settling back into its rhythm. The cattle lowed in the distance. The wind carried the faint smell of wildflowers from the meadow, and the mountains held us steady like they always had. And in that moment, Silas understood something I've known my whole life. Loyalty, vigilance, and courage aren't just words. They're what keep the people you love safe. Out here, justice isn't an idea. It's the way we live. It's the way we keep the dirt honest. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, I reflected on what had unfolded. My son was safe. The ranch was secure. And yet, the danger we had faced left lessons that can't be ignored. Trust your intuition. It's often the first warning when something or someone doesn't belong. Don't dismiss that uneasy feeling in your gut. It's there for a reason. Evil often wears a mask. Lexi seemed charming, polite, and even vulnerable, but that was all a strategy. She underestimated loyalty, preparation, and the bond between a father and son. Family loyalty isn't just about love, it's about protection. Acting before it's too late can save lives, preserve legacies, and prevent manipulation from taking root. Manipulation can be subtle and persuasive. Even someone we trust may unknowingly let it in. Recognize the signs early, act decisively, and protect the people and places that matter most. And here's something to consider, folks. Stories like this don't just happen in movies. They happen in real life. People walk into your life with hidden agendas, and if you aren't paying attention, it might already be too late. Subscribe before the next story blindsides you, the way Lexi nearly blinded my son. Every story I share is a warning, a lesson, a chance to recognize danger before it reaches your doorstep. Don't let yourself or your family be caught unprepared. And for those who aren't subscribing yet, I want you to stop for a moment and think, why not? Drop a comment below. Tell me why you're not hitting that button. Your reasons, your thoughts, your reflections, they matter. Engage with this story. Talk about it. Learn from it. The people who ignore warnings often regret it when it's too late. Don't be that person. Share your voice, comment, and join the family that looks out for each other. Remember, out here on the Thorn Ranch, justice isn't just a word, it's a way of life. We protect what we love, we trust our instincts, and we act before it's too late. And now, you've seen exactly why that matters.